Getting to grips with the layout elements in bricks is fundamental to being able to build your pages, but it can lead to confusion, especially if you're coming over from something like Elementor, which simply has just the container. If we take a look at bricks, we've got 4 different elements for the layout: your sections, your containers, your blocks, and your divs. Now in this video, I'm going to show you how to start using these, the differences between them, and we're going to take a look at how we can build out a typical loop design using all 4 of these different component pieces for our layouts. My name is Paul C, and if you're new to this channel, it's all about showing you how you can use WordPress to build amazing websites using a range of different tools coming from the fundamentals right the way to intermediate and advanced topics. Okay, so let's take a look now at how we can use bricks to start building things out and how these layout elements actually work. So first up, the 2 main elements we're going to start off with are the sections and the containers. Now sections are full width. They take up the entire space of the browser window. The container sits inside the section and takes up the width that you define using either a framework like Core Framework or ACSS, or by using the settings inside bricks itself. Let me show you how this works. So if we come over and choose a section, we'll click to insert it, and you'll notice if we expand the structure panel, we have a section and a container already inserted. If we take a look, you can see we've got these 2 boxes. The outer box, which takes up the full width, is the section. The inner box is the container, taking up, in this example, 1366 pixels. Now I'm using a framework, but if you are just using plain old vanilla bricks, all you need to do is come into your settings, into your theme styles, and you're going to come down to the container. Inside there, you can see we can set the width value. This is going to be the maximum width that that container sitting inside the full width section is going to take. These are the basic fundamental building blocks you're going to use for pretty much every part of your page. So for example, if you want to create a hero section, you'd add in a section with a container inside it and then put the various different elements inside. If you want to create another section, then you just simply come over and create or add another section in. And you'll see we now got a second section, and inside that second section, we again get a container. These can be moved around however you want to, but they're the basic foundations to make up pretty much every layout you're going to create. Let's delete this second one, and let's expand this first section and container out. So what we want to do is we want to create, in this example, a loop of cards. A typical kind of blog post or product page you're going to see, an archive page for WooCommerce, those kinds of things. To do that, we're going to select our inner container because we want to contain our content to this 1366 pixels wide, but you can set different values if you want to. This isn't a hard arbitrary value, and you can override it. But what we're going to do is we're going to select that container, we're going to come back over to the plus, and this time we're going to add in a block. Click to add the block in. Again, we'll expand this out. Now you'll see it doesn't look like anything has changed. That's because a block will take up 100% of whatever it sits inside. In this example, you can see we've got the block sits inside the container. So currently the block is taking up 100% of that container. Let's just see this in action by adding in another element. So we'll select our container, come back over and choose to add another block. So now we have 2 blocks, and you'll see the one block sits on top of the other, both of them taking up 100% of the width. Now, this is where we can start to use Flex or Grid to show how we want to lay things out. Now, we're not going to get too deep into Flex and into CSS Grid. I'll show you the fundamentals, but if you want more, let me know in the comment section down below. Okay, so we'll select our parent container that has the 2 blocks inside it, and by doing that, we're going to come over to the left-hand side, and you can see we've got all the options then for how this is going to work. You can see we've got display. By default, even though this is ghosted out, we are using the Flexbox model. To show that, you can see if we change it from vertical to horizontal, you now see instead of taking up 100% of the width, they now both take up 50-50 because we set this to be horizontal and therefore they align side by side. If we added a third one in, so we'll just duplicate this one, you'll see we now have 3, each one taking up 33.3% of the overall width of the container. Hope this is making sense. It kind of can be a little bit confusing to start off with, but once you wrap your head around it, it actually gets a lot easier. Okay, so let's come back over by selecting our container and take a look at the flex options that we have. We've got, as we've seen, the direction, so we can switch between vertical, where they stack on top of each other, horizontal, or we can reverse these. Then you've got your alignment for yourself, the main axis and the cross axis. Now we're going to come back to those in a moment. We've also then got things like the column gap, row gap, and so on. And we can handle things like how the flex will grow and so on. Again, like I say, this is going beyond what I want to cover to show you how these fundamentals work. Now, let's just say we want to put some space in between each one of these. Well, we can do that by simply using the column and row gaps. So let's just say we want to put 2 rem inside there. You can see now we get a gap in between each one of our blocks. You want to put a row gap in, again we'll do 2 rem. Now obviously we're not going to see anything because it's set to be horizontal, but if we switch this over to be vertical, you'll now see we get them stack on top of each other and we get the row gap as opposed to the column gap. Again, hope this is making sense. So let's make this a little easier. Let's select our first block, go to our styles, and let's just give this a background color. We'll choose this blue. Choose our second one, we'll choose a different color. We'll choose this mid blue. And finally, we'll choose our third one. We'll come back and we'll choose this different blue. So now we've got our 3 blocks color coded. So let's go back, select our container, come back into content, and this time we're going to do the reverse. So keep an eye on this first and last colored block. You see they now flip the opposite way. If we set this to be horizontal, you can see we can flip them back and forth. So finally, we've got the 4th and final element, which in this example is a div. So let's just choose our 3rd block and let's insert a div. Now you can see we get this little div. Let's give it a color so we can see it. So we'll choose our div and we'll set a background color. Let's do something like this red so we can easily see it. So now you can see that div only takes up a small portion of the overall block that it sits inside. It's not taking up 100%. That's because your div will grow and expand based upon the content that sits inside it. So for this example, let's add in just some text. We'll add a heading in, making sure our div is selected. So now you can see that expands to take up the overall space. So now if we choose the heading and come over to our font size and say, we'll set this to be something like 2 rem, you can see the heading gets smaller and the overall space taken up by the div also gets smaller. Okay, before we move on, let's take a quick look at some of the options you have for aligning things. We've seen how to set things horizontally, vertically, we've seen how to reverse columns and so on. But we've got a lot more options available. I'm not going to cover all these, I just want to show you quickly how they interact with various different things. So for example, let's come into our block and let's take a look at the options we've got then for positioning things. Now at the moment you can see we've got the align axis. This is by default always chooses the first item. Even if it's not highlighted, that's what's being chosen. So for example, you've got your start, and you've got your start. Each one of these 3 is exactly what's going on with this particular red item. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to our block. First of all, I'm going to just change the size of this. We're going to make this a little bit taller. So we're going to say our minimum height of 600. So we can see a little bit better what's going on. So with our block selected, come back over. Now what we can do is we can position this. So we click center, goes into the center. Click end, it goes to the right hand side. Click stretch, it stretches it out to full width. And then you've got baseline, we'll kind of just pop it into the top left hand corner. You can also then align things, the options by here. So we can choose this, start at the top, center, bottom. Now space between isn't going to make any difference, but we'll take a look at that a little later when we move on to a little bit more complex layouts. But you can use a combination of these to set things up. So if we want to center this perfectly in the center of this rectangle, we can choose center and center. It's now in the center of that rectangle, horizontally and vertically. So using these options, direction and so on, we can control the position of the different items inside different elements, our different building block layout elements, by using these options. I hope that makes sense. So now we've seen how each of these work, let's go and take a look at how we can use these 4 different layout items to create something a little bit more tangible. We're going to create a typical kind of loop layout, which you'd see in a blog or on an e-commerce archive page with all your products and so on. It's a very common thing you're going to do in any kind of builder. Now, I'm going to go through this quite quickly, but I'll concentrate specifically on these layout elements as opposed to the styling and all those kinds of things. Okay, so we're going to do, like you've seen before, we're going to add a section in. The section includes a container inside it. So now inside there, we're going to add in a block. And this block is what we're going to use for one of our card designs. So first of all, we need to set our container. And our container, we're going to set this, come into content. We're going to set this container to be a unordered list. We're going to select our block. And we're going to come in and we're going to set this to be a list item. The block, which is going to be our card, we'll leave it named block, but what we're going to do is we're going to just click afterwards and we'll just put in brackets card. So it makes a little bit more sense of what's going on. So let's come back up, choose our card, and what's happened now is you can probably see there's this little block on the left-hand side. Because we've set this to be an unordered list, it puts by default some padding on the left-hand side. Let's just go into a style and let's simply get rid of that, set that to 0, and that now sets the container to be full width with none of this rubbish in the way. Okay, so our card design now is taking up 100% of the overall space. So once we put some content inside here, we're going to need to deal with that. Now, speaking of content, we're going to order things in a certain way. We're going to organize things. Now, we're going to choose our block, and inside there, we're going to add in 2 more blocks. The reason we're going to do this is because we want our main content to be at the top of our card, but depending upon how much text we have, this could end up meaning that our bottom section, where maybe our meta information, you know, the comments, the author, and so on, could end up just being a little bit janky and all over the place. This method allows us to group things together and then use the Flexbox options to position things inside our card design. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's choose our first block, and inside there, we're going to add in 3 different items. We're going to add in an image, we're going to add in a heading, and we're going to add in some rich text. Let's expand that block. You can see there's the different items. Let's put our image second, so semantically it makes a little bit more sense. And now all we need to do is actually connect these up to the post dynamic data. Now, don't worry about this. If you've never used dynamic data inside Bricks, I've got a video here that'll show you how to get up and running with advanced custom fields free, and also how you can start to output that data. So I'm going to go through this quite quickly. We choose our heading, go to our content, get rid of the text that's in there, choose the little lightning bolt, and choose the post title. We'll choose our image, choose the little dynamic lightning bolt icon, and choose the featured image. And finally, we're going to grab our rich text, delete what's inside here, choose the lightning bolt, and we're going to choose post, and we're going to choose post excerpt. And finally, we're going to come down to the word limit and set this to be 20 words, and we'll put the ... for the read more. Now, don't worry that you can't see anything inside here. Once we create the loop, this will start to fill out the details. So the final thing I'm going to do is choose our block, our last block, and we're going to name this. We'll call that meta block, and we'll change this one to content block. Naming things is always good. So inside our meta block, we're simply going to just add in a meta element. Doesn't really matter too much what elements are going to be inside there. That's perfectly fine. So now all the content of our card is all set out. So the next thing we need to do is choose our card itself. This is the overall parent container for our cards. Let's just close that down so it makes it a little easier to see. This is containing the title, the image, and so on. We're going to select it, come over to the query loop, enable the query loop, and we're going to simply set this to be using posts, order by, title, and we'll set this to be ascending, and we'll limit this to 6 posts per page. So now what we've got is 6 posts pulled in from dynamic data. They look absolutely terrible, but all the elements are there for now. So the next thing we need to do is make this look a lot better. So we've seen the basics of how to get started using Flex. So we choose the container. You can see this is displaying as Flex at this point in time, and that's okay, but Flex isn't as flexible as CSS Grid. Now, I don't want to get into how to use CSS Grid and all the kind of things there. That's a lesson in its own right. If you want to learn more about it, let me know in the comment section down below. I'll create a video if enough people are interested. Now, before we do move on though, if you're getting value from this video and you're learning something, be sure to hit that subscribe button to be notified when new content is added. It helps the channel out and also keeps you up to date when I release new videos. Anyway, let's get back on. So with our container selected, what we're going to do is we're going to change this display from Flex, and we're going to choose the option for Grid. Now, nothing at all changes other than the options we have available on the left-hand side. But what we want to do is basically set this up to be a 2-column design. To do that, we're simply going to use 1FR space 1FR, and now we have 2 columns side by side and 3 rows in this example, showing all 6 of our items. Now quickly, I'm going to just go and apply some styling to this to make it look a little bit better. So don't worry too much. But before I do, I want to put a gap inside here. So we're going to say 2.5 rem. And you can see that now puts a gap in between the horizontal and the vertical between all of our different items. So let me quickly go and tidy these up, make them look a little bit nicer, and then we'll take a look at how we can move on. Okay, so I've applied a little bit of styling just to make things look a little bit easier to see what's going on. And everything looks fine because we've got the same amount of text because it is the same text on every one. But just to emulate there being an issue where this isn't all the same size, let me just come up to the card design and let's just set a minimum height to be something like 650 pixels. So you can see the problem we've got now is that we've got this meta text is sitting underneath and we've got this blank space underneath, which doesn't look the best. So we want to take this and push this right down to the bottom while keeping all this information at the top. And this is the reason why it makes sense to lock things together inside their own dedicated blocks, or divs if you want to use divs. They work in the same way. So what we can do now is we can set this content in the position using the flex model. So we'll choose our card, we'll come over to our content, and now you can see we've got these options for aligning the main axis. So we can set things to have space between, space around, space evenly, and so on. Now if we choose the space between, you can see now because we've got two blocks inside here, it takes a look at the first block and the second block and pushes things apart. They're treated as independent items. This just gives you a lot more flexibility simply by using one or two of the different building block elements that we've got for our layout. So there's lots of ways you can use these. You can choose this option, see it's put space around it, so it's put space above, below, and in between. Space evenly, as its name suggests, puts the same amount of space above, in between, and below. For this example, though, the space between looks better. So now we can come to our meta block, for example, and we can say, let's apply a little bit of space around this. So apply some padding. Now you're not going to see anything on there, but when we come into, for example, our border, we can choose to set a border at the top. Choose a color. We'll choose this blue just so you can see what's going on. And you see now we've got that line there. But everything is sitting apart perfectly. So if there's more text inside this block, less inside this one, because we've separated things out by nesting these various different layout elements, we can control how everything works. So that's the basic fundamentals of how you can use these layout elements to be able to create various different kinds of designs. You've seen how we can create them, the difference between all four, but also how you can nest them and you can use those alongside the flex options to control the layout, and also how we can get started using something simple like CSS Grid to create this kind of grid layout and give us more flexibility over our design. Now, if you want to learn more about this, please do let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know what you'd like me to cover in more detail. But for now, if you want to check out more about bricks, check out this playlist. There's tons of bricks videos there. As always, my name is Paul C. This is WPTuts. Until next time, take care.